So my guest today is a familiar face to many people in the Australian energy and e-mobility landscape, and is always up for a discussion about interesting and sometimes divisive topics in the industry. At the time when I was working with energy solutions back at Hydrotas and Momentum about 10 or 11 years ago, he was doing the same at AGL at what was called, I think, New Energy at the time. He's got a ton of experience in energy storage, including having worked for an innovative salt water-based battery manufacturer called Accion Energy. Currently, he's the head of emerging technologies for one of Australia's largest public EV charging networks, with a company name to suit, EV Networks. I'm very happy to call him a friend and someone that I can sort of bounce off ideas and opportunities. I'm really pleased to have him on today. G'day, Ed Lynch-Bell.
Good morning, everyone.
How you doing, Ed?
Yeah, doing pretty good. It's a lovely, lovely morning in Melbourne. So
Excellent. That's good. Hey, before we dig into maybe the sort of energy and e-mobility nerdery space, which I think we will have lots to chat about, keen to pick your brain a little bit about what can you tell us a bit about Ed and what you get out, sort of what gets you ticking outside of work?
well, I mean, we've just had a baby, so we've got a 6-month-old in the house. So basically, my main game right now, not least because I'm on parental leave right now. So
Awesome.
just lucky that Jasper is at daycare this morning, so we can chat. But other than that, I like to cook. I like to travel, ride my bike. Increasingly that's now the cargo bike with Jasper on the front, so that's pretty good fun. But yeah, just enjoying life with a new human in the house.
Yeah, and I'm sure that would be quite a big change to not having that small human there. I only have a couple of dogs myself, so I can't quite relate, but I would imagine it's pretty big change to every day.
Yeah, no, it's a different routine, but it's great fun.
Yeah,
It's
awesome. And
joy,
you've
so.
you've also got a fair bit of interesting kind of both in Japanese culture and in sake as well. Am I right?
Yes, yeah. So that was a kind of a sort of I don't know, an interest or an obsession that developed a few years ago, mainly because my partner Erica is allergic to sulfites in wine, so we're looking for something tasty to drink, and we discovered sake, and then
Mm.
we kind of threw ourselves into sort of very nerdy obsession with it. I mean, to the extent now that my partner's an academic and she's been doing some research work, and so back in 2019, she had a sabbatical, so we were traveling around Japan, and she was interviewing sake brewers, and I was getting to kind of
Mm.
drink and enjoy that. So that's kind of been part of our life for a few years as well. So
Yeah, yeah.
hoping to take Jasper to Japan, not for sake, but
Not yet.
culture. So.
That's right, and it is just an amazing country to travel to. I've only been once, but I long to go back. It's just such a friendly, logical, beautiful place to visit. It's amazing how, despite not speaking the same language or understanding anything of the language, pretty much in my case, how you can still quite simply work out how things work in society, how to get from point A to point B. It's quite remarkable how they've accomplished that. Now, can you tell us a bit about your career? You've had a really interesting one. Touched on a couple of points there, working with AGL in the past, but what kind of, I guess, perhaps from what you wanted to become when you were a kid through to what you started at university, all the way up until where you're at today?
I don't know. I don't know what necessarily what I wanted to become as a kid, but I've always been interested in the interaction between people and things. And originally when I was at school, I was very keen on design and engineering, and I actually wanted to go and do industrial design. But actually, I was talked out of that by my a high school. I think mainly because they thought that I would have to go to a fairly low class institution, and they would their league table ratings might suffer as a result. Nonetheless, I did go to engineering school in Sheffield in the UK, and also in Turin in Italy at the Politecnico there.
Mm.
And a lot of what I studied there was that kind of human machine, human engineering interaction stuff. I had a great advisor there who's now, does the human centered design, runs the human centered design program at Imperial College, but he kind of first sort of got me on that train. And it's something that I've really been interested in the whole way through my career. I guess I was a little bit jaded coming out of university. I didn't really know what I was going to do. Initially I thought, oh, I'll go and work on the railways, but because that's good engineering kind of thing. But around the time I left university, the railways in the UK started firing a whole bunch of people, so there were no jobs there. And I ended up kind of almost by accident working for, I guess, the first startup in my career, which is a small company called On Air Systems, which had built one of the very, very first single PC, basically TV station in a box, which back in like 2003, this was pretty radical. For $80,000, you could get a PC and it would do, video, audio, motion graphics, everything. What you'd previously need a whole room full of equipment to achieve. And that was really interesting. I mean, not least because it was my first experience of startup, but kind of my first experience of, product market fit. And indeed, in my first experience of getting fired from a company that ended up going out of business. But, I started there broadcasting TV. I was responsible for SpongeBob SquarePants being available in the Netherlands in Dutch.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, we had Nickelodeon as one of our customers, so that was good. And then I spent a lot of time flying around the world building TV stations.
And I think if I might say, your podcast and video setup for people that are accessing this on YouTube is looking quite professional this morning. So I can certainly see those roots there.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, no, but yeah, it was kind of like I say, it's kind of like that sort of first experience of kind of I guess creative destruction in kind of a Schumpeterian way. So we had built this, or the company had built this TV channel in a box thing, and we were using very, very high quality hardware, very, very high quality video cards, and it was designed to kind of meet the broadcast standards, very, very strict broadcast standards. You're not allowed to drop frames, you're not allowed to, you're not allowed to glitch, you're not allowed to go and we got out competed by a bunch of new companies that came in and didn't care anything about that. And the thing was, there's a limited number of premium broadcasters that care about that, and it's quite hard to get cut through into those broadcasters that have already got a big investment in kind of the old tech. But there's any number of small TV stations, or at least there were then, that just wanted a cheap way of getting on air. And they didn't, I mean, for instance, one of our customers was a Nigerian channel that was broadcasting a lot of Nigerian soap operas that were sort of shot on handheld cameras. And so their idea about quality was somewhat different. So anyway, we were selling a box for $80,000, and then came along and they built a box they could sell for $10,000. And of course, it became very, very hard to build a business around quality. So I left there, I joined another broadcast company, and very, very quickly kind of came to the conclusion that I'd done everything that I could possibly do in that industry. It wasn't really exciting. And this would have been about 2008, actually, which included a trip running the teleprompters at the Republican National Convention in St. Paul, Minnesota, which was kind of an interesting experience. I got insulted by Sarah Palin, if you remember.
Oh, congrats.
Yeah, it was great.
That's great.
But anyway, I kind of said, I want to get back into engineering. I'm very, very motivated by trying to find solutions to the climate crisis. I had a lot of friends who at the time were sort of gluing themselves to the runway at Heathrow and this kind of activist thing. And so, well, I'm a bit too chicken to go and do that, but I've got these skills, maybe I should apply them differently. So I went looking for a graduate program and kind of said, well, I'd like to continue this startup journey, but I'd also like to do something a bit more worthy. And I just not long before met Erica, who's now my wife, and she said, oh, well, you're an engineer, you should go and have a look at Carnegie Mellon in the States. That's where I did my undergrad, and you're going to find something there. So we went out to Pittsburgh, and I joined this program, really interesting program out of fairly unique department, which is the Department of Engineering and Public Policy there. And the program was Engineering and Technology Innovation Management. 1-year master's program. I think it was only the second or third year that they ran it. And basically kind of the greatest hits of an MBA, combined with a free choice of doing anything in this really amazing university. And so I really focused on energy topics. And part of that program was you had to go and get a summer internship. I originally thought, I should go and like intern with a VC firm or something like that, but that didn't eventuate. And I had done, one of the capstone programs was a program called Decision Tools for Engineering Design and Entrepreneurship. Big program run by a couple of professors called Erica Fuchs and Jeremy Mikulek. And I'd done really well in that class. It was super, super interesting about kind of matching engineering design with customer desire and building the sort of financial model to kind of understand how a new product might be made and then perform in the market. And so I walked into one of my other professors, a guy called Jay Whittaker, and he basically said, "Oh, have you done this class?" I said, "Yeah, I did pretty well in that." And he said, "Can you do this for this battery technology I've got?" And I said, "And I've got some money, So I sat in a university store cupboard for a summer and modeled out this battery technology. And along the way, kind of discovered that the way that Jay wanted to manufacture it was not the way that would be most cost effective. So that was a good insight. And then in my final semester in that program, we were pitching and raising money. So we put up for some funding with the Department of Energy, and we were pitching to VC companies. And so by the time I graduated, we'd raised $30 million and we were kind of up and running. And that was the start of Aquion, which is this aqueous sodium ion battery technology company. And
which is, if I'm not mistaken, is kind of a technology that's getting a little bit of a second wind at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, sodium ion technology is getting a bit of a second wind. I don't know that many people are looking at it from an aqueous perspective. They're looking at it more as an alternative to lithium. And the interest might die down now that the price of lithium has come down, because whilst there's some good reasons to work in sodium, there's also some practical problems because sodium ions are just that much bigger and they're that much harder to move through electrodes and move through electrolytes. So there are some challenges. Nonetheless, it's good that there are options.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so we set up an R&D facility and then a pilot production facility. My job there was called the technical engineering manager. So I was responsible for building up the process engineering function, the quality engineering function, trying to work out. So I spent a lot of time flying around the world buying manufacturing equipment. That was interesting learning experience. I mean, and then fundamentally, Aquion, I mean, it made a few missteps on the way, but it didn't quite have what it thought it had. And I think there's another great learning there, because we always have to learn, is that one of the challenges with this being an aqueous battery system is that it was very, very low in energy density and power density. And to the extent that the rest of the ecosystem really, really matters. Because when you've got low energy and power density, suddenly costs for things like steel to rack up your batteries, concrete pads to put your battery on, suddenly they start to multiply because you're just that much bigger than lithium ion. I mean, the other thing as well, when we started, lithium ion batteries cost $900 a kilowatt hour. When I finished, they were about $200 a kilowatt hour. And that was what that was what we were competing with. And we knew we had to scale quickly. And that led to a few decisions which we came to regret later on. Again, very, very good learning experience there. But so anyway, to kind of cut it, what could be a very long story short, my partner Erica finished her PhD, searched the world for a job, and then the University of Melbourne offered her a job, and so we came here. And that was the end of my period with Aquion. I arrived here in 2013, and I started doing some things around the industry. But it wasn't until I joined AGL in that new energy team, working with a guy called Fox, who he was just somebody I just randomly hit up on LinkedIn, and he sort of, you look interesting, let's have a conversation. And then 3 or 4 months later, he called me up and said, "Hey, AGL is setting up this new energy team. They need somebody who's got some expertise in batteries. Do you want to join? And so I ended up as the storage lead in that team. We did some cool stuff around home storage, around virtual power plants. We did some investment,
Mm.
some investment stuff. Some good, some bad. But it, one of the problems with doing the new stuff in a big established company,
Mm.
and again, this we'll probably talk about this in terms of EV adoption. You get the Kodak problem. You get the problem whereby what you're doing is too small, too insignificant. It doesn't generate the right kind of returns in the right way, and it's
Mm.
hard to get the the bit of the business, which at that time was printing money like nobody's business, kind of interested
Yeah.
in the future. And there was some senior leadership changes. There was a loss of interest. I went through
Yeah.
8 reorganizations in like 3.5 years at AGL.
Mm.
Something crazy like that. So there was some fantastic work being done. Whenever you kind of say, hey, this works, now can we take it from 1,000 customers to the 3.4 million customers today? It's kind of like, ooh, that
Yeah.
doesn't,
Yeah.
it doesn't fit. It doesn't look like what we do, and it looks like it might be a distraction from just the day to day.
Yeah, that's right. And,
So,
and
go.
I think, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
It was just really interesting to reflect on, because I was at Hydro Tasmania Momentum Energy at the same time as you. I think I also started in 2013 working there in what we called Energy Solutions, New Energy, exactly the same type of thing. I'm sure you guys would have been more advanced than we were, but we had exactly the same problems, right? Sometimes being early and putting in a proper team in place, and then having the business kind of assess it compared to their BAU being, in the case of AGL, as you said, printing money by generating electricity on one end and selling it on the other. It becomes really, there you see it as a risk. Like, are we going to eat our own lunch? Is this going to be confusing to customers? All that kind of stuff you're competing with. And I think there's probably a few parallels at the moment in the EV space, where I think in Australia we're kind of, I think we're at a super exciting growth trajectory at the moment, right? We've gone from a couple of percent EV adoption, or 3 in 2022, to like over 7 last year. I think at the moment we're tracking pretty well to be around the 10% mark. I would probably expect that to be hopefully 15+% mark by the end of the year. It's really exciting, but I think some companies that might be in the middle of that, say EV charging companies from overseas that might have a cash crunch or not have the ability to get growth capital at the moment, would find that it's hard to then justify having a big team in a place like Australia. But I would think that being a relatively early mover in Australia and having your stake in the ground, as with EV networks when it comes to charging infrastructure, is going to be a very good position to be in.
I mean, that's right. I mean, Australia is a really interesting market. It's a small country and it's a rich country, but it's also it's a long way from a lot of places. So it's kind of it's an interesting question that if you're coming from overseas, why should you care about Australia with your technology product? There are some great things. We have very cheap electricity, even if we have quite expensive distribution. We've got huge amounts of solar, where we're truly a world leader there. We've got this really interesting population of people who are potential early adopters of technologies. But the other thing as well is, I think that again, kind of reflecting back on that AGL experience, we're very good at doing pilots. We're very good at experimenting, and then we kind of we don't stick the landing in that conversion to mass market. Everybody should read their Jeff Moore Crossing the Chasm. There's a lot more majority customers than there are early adopters out there. And those, we have to be, forever sort of mindful that weirdos like us who are, early adopters, are problem solvers, we'll deal with friction, we'll be more engaged with the product. the majority of customers just want simplicity. And so
Yeah.
there's always this disconnect, and we're seeing this with EVs, we're seeing this with, VPPs, we're seeing this with all kinds of things, is when you try and transition to that majority, people don't want complexity, they want simplicity. And that's where we need to think, and we need to kind of get out of this sort of, let's do lots of pilots mindset, but actually think about, well, actually we've done lots of pilots.
Yeah.
Now, how do we actually make this truly mass market?
Question.
And in the kind of EV world, and we'll go there later, I'm sure, in the EV world, it's still not figured out yet, and that's a really interesting challenge.
And I think that's the thing around, if you look at your background and sort of that human-centered design and getting people to, I guess, start using what can be a fairly complex product if it doesn't work well or works in the way that people expect it to. It seems like that's really coming back into its own with your role at EV Networks at the moment, right? Where you work with emerging technologies. I think if I can give you one little plug actually just on the EV Networks charging network, is that it's, we've got a little bit of a hit and miss with some of the public charging infrastructure in Australia. It's getting better over time. But if there's one network you always know is going to work, it's your network. I think you've got a really, really great program as far as usability is concerned, but also when it comes to the operations and maintenance, they always seem to be working, despite sometimes having exactly the same type of equipment as others, which probably goes to show that it's about more than just the equipment, right?
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. I mean, we've got a great team that runs the operations and maintenance, which is fantastic. And then and we invest a lot of time and effort in making sure that it's available. But I think the kind of sort of the wider point, and just thinking about the whole ecosystem, and I'm going to quote somebody who gets a lot of clicks out of disparaging the EV industry, Paul Marek from Car Expert, who writes some really weird articles. But one thing he did say in one of his sort of recent things is, this is too hard for most people. And he's 100% right on that. The EV, the EV ecosystem as an integrated product is too hard for most people. You think about a petrol car, you can pull out of your driveway, pull out of your parking space. You can get pretty much anywhere in Australia without really having to think about it. You are going to find fuel. You are going to find fuel, wherever you need it. If the petrol station is broken, or it's run out of your diesel, or the tanker's pulled in, you can just go 5 minutes down the road and there'll be another one. That's not the case with EVs. And so this is where it kind of gets interesting, is you're asking people to make one really complex transition, which is from a petrol powered vehicle to an electric vehicle. And then you start to ask them to engage with a whole bunch of other things, whether it's like plug share, or whether it's like apps to initiate charging, all of these kind of things. And I think we as an industry can do a lot better. I mean, we at EV are trying to do better all the time. And I think a really interesting case in point is an early adopter looks at the number of apps and goes, oh, I wish I had one more app that just linked all of these apps together and allowed me to access every single charger that's out there. Just one more app. But the thing is, the solution to app fatigue is not another app. It's actually thinking about what do consumers really want, and what do consumers want, and what do we as a business want? Well, a great rule in business is always make it easy for people to give you money.
Yeah.
And so the number one requested feature that we get is for credit card readers on the chargers. In fact, you can even see this in our logs. People will just reflexively tap their credit card on the on the RFID reader. We can see that as a misread in the data. And so that's one of the things we've been doing. We are now testing credit card readers on our chargers, and it was a little bit challenging to get to a position where we could technically do this, and we could do this securely. We thought that the lowest friction way of doing this is putting the credit card reader on the charger, one reader per charger. Minimize the amount of time, the amount of walking around. Really thinking about that human machine interaction there. So that's that's one dimension.
Mm.
That's one dimension there. But the kind of the yeah, but kind of sorry. But yeah, having overcome those technical challenges, and now starting to install those readers, we're now starting to see, people really engaging. They're using those readers, and it's what do you want when a customer, they may have be on a test drive, they may have just bought their first EV.
Mm.
Do you want them standing in the rain, fiddling, downloading an app,
Yeah.
signing up, putting in their credit card details, or do you just want to take their money?
Yeah.
You can have an interaction with them, and we do value the interaction and the data that comes through
Mm.
the app. But that first moment when I've run out of batteries, I need a charge. I don't care about any of this. Just let me pay.
Yeah.
That's really, really important. And it's different segments value different things,
Mm.
but a vast chunk of the customer base just wants to pay for their charging and then
Totally.
get going again. So it's kind of
Yeah.
it's the biggest no-brainer.
Mm.
And the fact that it's been such a technical challenge to get the readers and the chargers and the software and everything integrated and integrated securely, which actually is partly to do with us being in Australia and not having access to some things that are available overseas.
Mm.
But the that kind of, you sort of go back and go, well, why was this not available? Why was this not available like when we started, or why is this not just standard on every
Yeah.
single
Yeah.
EV charger
Yeah.
everywhere in the world?
And hopefully that's, I agree. I think it is the most obvious way from a consumer perspective, and it's making it easy to take their money. I think is that's right on. That's you got to keep that super simple. But I guess from your perspective of being a charge point operator, surely there's got to be, so that's positive, right? Yeah, easy to get their money. What are some of the cons for someone like you? You mentioned data, for example. I would imagine in this case that you're not going to get as much information about these customers, and therefore you're not going to be able to serve them as well in the future with different experiences, or providing them with updates about your charging networks and perhaps products and services that you offer. Is that one of the cons by doing it this way?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and there's lots of different customer journeys for all kinds of different people.
Mm.
But we have a value. One of our company values is value driven by data. This is how we achieve our strategic aims. And I think some people sort of see that as sort of slightly sinister. You're like, oh, we're going to sell data. No, that's not what we do. What we mean by value driven by data is we want to understand, where you are, where you go, where you live, because we want to build a better charging network.
Mm.
Fundamentally, we want to understand about our customers and about how they fall into different segments, and they have different needs, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we're putting the right chargers in the right place for the right people. And so we do a lot with that's where we get the insights, and that's where we deliver that value from the data,
Mm.
because
Yeah.
we want charging stations where people want to charge. I mean, that's fundamental, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a good point. Now, just pivoting on to a different topic, a lot of the Australian news media, or in particular the one that's probably related to energy and e-mobility, there's been a lot of talk about the newly announced new vehicle emission standard, which has been announced by the federal government. It was recently out for consultation with industry, and let's just say there was some claims being made by FCAI, the industry body for the automotive industry, around what this would mean for consumers. I think it's fair to say that some of those claims were overblown, or at least intentionally misrepresented. But taking a step back, can you tell perhaps our listeners what is the new vehicle emission standard, what's being proposed by government, and what's going to happen over the next year or so?
Yeah, so it's relatively straightforward. I mean, I think probably everybody by now has sort of heard the line, which is, in the OECD, the only two countries without some form of vehicle emission standard are us and Russia. But fundamentally, it is a mechanism by way of which the auto industry has to improve the efficiency of its vehicles over time. And so, this has been talked about for a number of years. We've been through sort of several rounds of consultations. The proposed model was put out earlier in the year, and three options were put out. But broadly speaking, basically every year there's a target for each company that sells vehicles here in Australia to meet an average emissions.
And that's sorry to interrupt. And that's across their portfolio of vehicles
across their portfolio.
Market, right?
And within there are slightly different options, but the preferred option basis, there's two classes of vehicles: heavy vehicles and light vehicles. They've got slightly different emissions requirement. If you beat the average, you can generate credits, which you can sell to somebody who doesn't beat the average. So for a pure EV company like Tesla or BYD or Polestar, they're going to beat the average by a large amount, and they're going to have credits to sell, and that hopefully brings down the cost of EVs because they can factor those credit sales in. A company like Mazda, which doesn't have very much in the way of efficient vehicles, is going to have to buy lots of credits, or change their ways. And so, I mean, this is relatively uncontroversial because this is how it works in the US, this is how it works in the EU, and the government proposed a trajectory where we sort of converge with the US because on average, vehicles in Australia use 50% more fuel per kilometre or per 100 kilometres than they do in the US, which is quite staggering given you think of the US as this land of big vehicles and that. And so seems like a fairly reasonable proposal. Yeah. I mean, I think there's probably a few ways in which it could be better. I'm always want things to go faster, but I think option B, as it was called, was a fairly reasonable proposal. And it's interesting because it was also more or less what the FCAI, the Federal Chamber of Automotive Industries, asked for last year in their submission. And now they then have been very, very anti the option B proposal, saying, "Oh, it's too fast, it's too soon." And look, I mean, there is a certain amount of ambition in the target, but come on, I think it's a sort of a come on, guys. Climate change has been a reality, my entire life. The Kyoto Protocol was signed in like 94, 95, I can't remember exactly. You are able to meet these targets in other markets. You have the technology, you have the vehicles. And if you don't, that's your problem. Nonetheless, change will cost, and so there's a certain amount of foot dragging and complaining going on, including from kind of sort of segments of the market which should be okay, at least for the first few years. So it's kind of it's a sort of an interesting it's an interesting situation.
Yeah, it's quite perplexing. It's you're right. It's the companies that aren't able to adjust quickly to this, from my point of view, are companies that haven't moved fast enough, haven't been able to see the fact that there's only a tiny part of the world that haven't adopted similar standards, which includes Australia. Of course we will, and when we do, we need to catch up. I think that's kind of common sense for how to assess the market into the future, what's going to happen. You can't just rely on simply the government ramping it up slowly to account for the fact that you've been slow in sort of turning your business around. That's certainly what I think. Obviously, we've seen a couple of interesting moves regarding the emission standard. We've seen Tesla and Polestar making a complete exit from that automotive body, FCAI. We've also seen at least Volkswagen making a bit of a statement with leaving the policy committee as part of FCAI. What do you think are kind of the likely next steps as far as the standards concerned? Do you think the government's going to go steam ahead? Do you think we'll have a scheme up and running by 1st of Jan 2025 as proposed?
Well, I sincerely hope so. I sincerely hope so. But politics being what it is, and next year being an election year is going to be a challenge. So there's obviously we could take a very kind of like utilitarian approach to this and say, yeah, let's just push on because we can see the benefits with the benefits being, but that political calculus is going to come in there. So whilst I hope we're going to be up and running on the 1st of January, I do have a slight fear that it's going to be somewhat watered down from what was proposed, and that is a great shame. As I said before, we're a rich country, we're a mature country. We've got this great access to this great renewable energy resource. There's no reason why we couldn't go quickly, why we couldn't actually be a leader in the transition.
Mm.
But I think, kind of reflecting back on that sort of tech change thing, there's also a kind of a problem is that the EV industry worldwide is struggling with this transition from early adopters to majority customers. There's every whether it's Tesla or whether it's like a mature automaker has taken a very logical approach, which is to kind of start with the early adopters, start with the people who are willing to pay more. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times people saying this is the first new car I've ever bought, but I wanted to spend more than I've ever spent on a car before to go electric because I believe this is the right thing to do. I mean, I think you're in that category. And so they've kind of sort of taken this approach. We'll start at the top and work down the market, but this does mean that basic sort of cheap mobility is not really catered for by anybody. And indeed, actually, I mean, you kind of look at the vehicle market over the last sort of 20, 30 years, engines have got massively more efficient, like petrol engines, like the amount of useful work you can get out of a petrol engine today versus 2 or 3 decades ago is incredible. But that hasn't necessarily gone into moving people or moving things more efficiently. You've ended up, the auto industry has convinced people to buy bigger, heavier, more expensive cars. They want to maximize their revenue, they maximize their products. Why shouldn't they? But it does mean that kind of the industry and consumers have been in this cycle where people want more, they want bigger things. And the auto industry is really odd because you've got a primary market and a secondary market for cars. And the primary market, there's corporates buying vehicles, the individuals buying vehicles, and maybe like sort of 25, somewhere between 25 and 40% of the overall market. But in terms of people buying cars, the vast majority, I'm going to say something slightly controversial. Normal people don't buy new cars. Normal people who just want to get to work on time for the lowest cost possible go and buy a second-hand car. And so, but they're reliant on the auto industry selling the weirdos. That's the weirdos who buy new cars, what they want, and then that kind of sort of trickling down. So what you've seen, regardless of the EV transition, is average car prices keep going up, well in excess of inflation because people want to buy, the bigger thing, the faster thing. They kind of like there's certainly a segment of customers that treat car purchase like a game of top trumps. They want the most cylinders or the most power or whatever. That's fine, but it does mean that in the name of maximizing profits, you don't get many manufacturers engaging in selling small and cheap and basic vehicles, and certainly not here in Australia. And that applies, even more so to EV because, aside from, I guess, what's going on in China, and a few kind of outliers out there like sort of Nissan Sakura in Japan, the industry is focused on building big cars, and they're engaging in the top trumps game. It's like, we just want to put a bigger battery in that's going to deliver more range and go further, and convincing people that they just have to wait a little bit longer, and then the kind of the car of their dreams will be there. And so I think the industry has done a sort of a disservice to everybody by sort of focusing everybody's minds on the inconvenience rather than the convenience of electric, and not being kind of ready with products across all segments that can satisfy all needs, including that sort of basic reliable mobility need.
Yeah.
For people who fundamentally just want to get to work on time.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, I think one of the perhaps better things about the fact that we haven't had an emission standard in Australia, I think, is that we have started really seeing in the last few years, seeing some of those Chinese players like BYD and others really set Australia as a target for their vehicles in the first place, often actually launching products here before Europe. And I think that should really be something that keeps the automotive industry in Europe and the US up at night, and I'm sure it does. I think we're going to see a real onslaught of more affordable electric vehicles coming out of China. That's going to be good for consumers. That's going to push down prices for EVs from those European and US players too. They're going to have to respond, and I would imagine that we'll be perhaps not forced to we're not necessarily going to see a whole heap of smaller cars straight away, but I think we're going to start seeing more and more affordable vehicles coming into the market here, and that's fundamentally a good thing for consumers. Hey,
Yeah.
I'm mindful we're running a little bit low on time. I have one question left for you. I wanted to pick your brain on. If you could wish for one change in Australia to really ramp up EV adoption, what would that change be?
I mean that's a really, really interesting question, because I don't want to kind of answer it by saying let's implement the new vehicle emission standard, because that's kind of a given that we should do that, and we should. Yeah, but I kind of answer it in two separate ways. I mean, first of all, let's think about the transition to an EV ecosystem also as an opportunity to think about how we access mobility. Because at the end of the day, kind of utilitarian perspective, it's about getting people to places. And another interesting statistic is vehicle occupancy has also cratered over this sort of last 20, 30 years. You've gone from like average occupancy in a vehicle of like over 2 to like nearly down as low as 1. So we have more people needing more cars to get to places. And EVs don't solve congestion. They don't solve parking. They don't solve urban sprawl. They're just kind of a one-for-one replacement. So I think and not many people will know this, but I'm kind of a bit of a fraud in this industry. I'm in the car industry, and I haven't owned a car for I think since 2007. And but I get my mobility in all kinds of ways. I get it through rideshare, I get it through car share, I get it through my bicycle, I get it through kind of like shared micro mobility. There's lots and lots of ways to do that. So I think with EVs being more expensive, people should take the opportunity to think about, well, should we think about second car? Do we really need a second vehicle? Are there other ways in which we can access our mobility? And I think Australian cities are pretty sprawly, but they will densify over time, and there's a sort of a demand for that more sort of that 15-minute city, that sort of active active transport, micro transport, because at the end of the day, it's a lot easier.
Totally.
You're there, and
you
then
get to enjoy your city more as well, right?
well, exactly. So I think that's sort of one angle, but then the other angle is let's actually challenge that assumption that everybody wants to buy a big SUV. People only want to buy a big SUV because, like I say, there's been this cycle. When I was a kid, BMWs went 357, Mercedes went C and S, Ford went, Fiesta, Escort, Sierra Granada. There were no SUVs out there. Car makers go, oh, we're only selling what people want to buy. But that's only because car makers and consumers have been on that journey where car makers are saying, hey, do you want to buy this SUV? And people go, oh, I like it. And so here's an SUV. But I think car makers can lead people on a different journey as well. And I think, the challenge I would put to the industry is hey, maybe use this opportunity to think about how do you persuade consumers to buy and buy profitably small and light vehicles? Because at the end of the day, you look at something like the Nissan Sakura and you put it next to something like the Hummer EV. These are both vehicles that can come to Australia. The Hummer's got 4 times the battery. It weighs 3 times as much. And most of the time they're going to be doing the same job, which is sitting very, very slowly in traffic, doing nothing. So give people opportunities to bring the small vehicles, market the small vehicles, sell the small vehicles, and I think that a company that does that, whether it's BYD or whether it's Nissan or whoever, may surprise themselves. They may surprise themselves going, actually, we can convert some of those secondary market buyers into new car buyers, and we can grow not just our share of the market, but the market overall, because there's an untapped reserve of customers for small, light utilitarian.
Yeah.
So I hope that's the opportunity that people sees.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really, really interesting thought to probably wrap this up with. I think it's a good challenge for the auto industry to change their ways in order to help us consumers change our ways too. I was going to ask you a few questions about vehicle to grid and vehicle to home, but I think, and about that fundamental topic on the utility of vehicles and making sure they're useful assets in when they are standing still. But let's save that one for a future podcast.
Well, yeah, that can definitely come far in the future, because it's going to take so long for that to become.
Yeah, true.
We got plenty of time to talk about that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for coming on today, Ed. Really, really enjoyed picking your brain and having a conversation. Looking forward to a future one soon.
Excellent. Well, thank you ever so much.